Soberanía is non-negotiable. That's what Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum repeats time and again at her mañaneras, at speeches, at rallies, on television and in person. She says it, her government says it, her political party says it, her apparatus says it. The agents of the United States of America must never, ever set foot on Mexican soil in any operational capacity. The sovereignty of the nation comes first, even before the security of the nation, even before the nation's own capacity to police itself, even before the safety and lives of its own citizens. As Sheinbaum herself has noted, the first American intervención in Mexico cost the country half its territory. There have been plenty more since 1848, but none have resulted in further Mexican territorial losses, and all of them were direct responses to the Mexican exportation of violence and insecurity into the United States. Observe the narratives of the Mexican left long enough, and you see the same themes emerge over and over. Mexico, always the victim. Mexico, always wronged. It's a useful narrative that insulates the ruling elite and deflects attention from the fact that it has served its nation exceptionally poorly for most of the past 200 years. Of course, soberanía is, in fact, entirely negotiable because the Mexican state has been voluntarily surrendering sovereignty for decades. And that's from an article called Mexican Standoff, the cover story on the Spectator World's June 8th, 2026 edition. That story is by me, Joshua Treviño. This is the hard country.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hard Country. My name is Ariana Guajardo. I have been waiting for a piece like this basically every time I do my show prep. So thank you so much, Josh, for writing this. And can you please do more of them from now on?
I'll do my best. Thank you. Yeah.
But I really do think that this is in the Spectator. It's called Mexican Standoff. I don't know who came up with that title, if it was you or their team, whoever did.
It was not me. It was the good people in their London offices who think up the titles. I just wrote the text.
See, I wish I had a hat to take off and tip to them because this is excellent. Great title. But in general, it goes through what you were talking about at the beginning. That's from the introduction. This concept of soberanía. Dang it. My mom's going to be so disappointed if I can't get this word right today.
Right. If that's the only thing she has to be disappointed in, you're in great shape. Yeah.
No, and every time I try speaking Spanish now, she's like, you don't sound like you're from the Valley anymore. I can tell you live in Austin. So I'm sorry, Mom. But we start out with this concept of sovereignty, and you talk about the way that they have surrendered that. Who have they surrendered that to, Josh?
Oh, great question. Well, I think it's worth going back and understanding why soberanía has become such a theme in Mexican history. And it really has to do with the failure of the Mexican central state, starting almost in independence, to actually secure the territorial integrity of Mexico. So you get, this is going to be a 6-hour podcast. We're going to talk about the whole sweep of Mexican history. Actually, I can compress it pretty efficiently in this for this theme. You have independence in 1821-ish, depending on if you're dating from Hidalgo or Iturbide.
Right.
And Mexico, or at least what used to be the Viceroyalty of New Spain, is actually claiming territory. Doesn't effectively control the territory, but is claiming territory basically up to the Canadian border, essentially the Oregon country, all the way down through most of Central America. And for a brief moment, they do actually, are the de facto sovereigns of all this. But it starts to spin apart. Mexico experiences its first territorial losses when the Mexican Empire breaks up, it takes a matter of months. The Central American provinces become independent. And then, of course, Texas then breaks away in 1836. And after the U.S. Mexican War, 1846, 1848, Sheinbaum's right, they do lose half the territory. We can get into that in depth. But as a consequence of that, now Mexico's final formal loss of territory occurs in the Gadsden Purchase, which I think is 1853. Double check me on that, Internet. In which the U.S. purchases essentially Tucson, Arizona, so we can put a rail line through it. But this sort of traumatization of like loss of territory and this idea that the state, the nation, are forever on the precipice of extinction really takes root at that point. And so what ends up happening is that Mexican politics and Mexican civics ends up getting oriented against intervención, against these powers that are supposedly going to pull Mexico apart at any moment, whether it's the French, whether it's the Spanish returning. or the Americans. And of course, the United States of America is perceived as the primary threat. Even though it's been coming on to 2 centuries since the U.S. Mexican War, we'll have the Texas bicentennial next decade. This is always the primary threat, and actually still today, in what passes for Mexico's strategic education with the Mexican armed forces, they still work on problems against the United States. And so this is the origin of the soberanía rhetoric, and it is a real force. But at the same time, I think to your point, Ariana, it's also increasingly preposterous and phony, because what soberanía, sovereignty, is invoked to do is cover. It's only directed against the United States. The Mexican state, I assume, as we'll discuss on the show, is perfectly happy to surrender sovereignty to criminal cartels. They're perfectly happy to surrender sovereignty to offshore third-party balancers, the Chinese, the Russians, and so on. And so we have to understand it now as less a real principle of action, which is not to dismiss its force and civics, and more as a cover that Mexico deploys as rhetoric and to some extent civic reality to keep the United States out of their business being primarily the maintenance of the narco-state synthesis that now governs Mexico.
And I'm glad you brought up again this idea of victim status that they continue to have as part of their education. Because coming in from an American point of view, on the outside looking in, it's kind of preposterous to think that we're wanting to expand into Mexico for a few reasons. One, if we wanted to, we already would have. Second of all, I've never heard an American express that idea once. So it's funny that it really, the way they're able to continue with that victim narrative that then perverts the way that they their citizens look at the United States. And it seems like at least Scheinbaum purports to look at the United States.
There's a lot of the world that thinks in much longer terms than we do as Americans, for good and for ill. But on the latter count, and I do think this is a deranging force, the idea that the strategic threats of the 1840s are those of the 2020s is absurd. Now, in fairness to Mexico, it's not the only Latin American country that suffers from this. A lot of Peruvian civics to this day continues to be oriented against getting revenge against the Chileans for a war that happened in the 1880s. So it drives actual defense acquisitions in Peru. So we just have to understand that there are frequently these civic fixations, but we also have to understand why these civic fixations happen. And as I read in the opening of the piece, Mexico as a victim is a great deflection from the reality of Mexico as a terribly governed country. Mexico is a great country. The Mexicans are great people, as we know. But the ruling class is largely incompetent to its job, and I think that's what we're seeing unfold now.
And they've basically, I would say sold, but they've basically just given away their territory and the safety of their own citizens to the cartels, which we've repeated multiple times on the show.
We have.
But let's talk about what's happened recently, because we've been gone for a little bit. We had the North America Summit, which is all on the TPPF YouTube channel, so people should definitely check that out, especially if you're interested in Mexican civics. What we've talked about here is just expanded by numerous experts in different panels. But since we last had a chance to meet on the show, the last time we were talking about the incident that took place in Chihuahua, where 2 of our CIA officers, along with some Mexican officials, were killed basically in service of Mexico and the Mexican people in a cartel raid. Or I guess leaving the cartel raid, I guess, to be more precise, potentially,
it's funny,
right?
We don't have a lot of details,
okay.
but yeah, they were involved. What we do know is that they were involved in an operation presumptively against a narco lab. And yes, 2 CIA officers, apparently also the Chihuahuan state security minister or equivalent thereof, and then another Chihuahuan security officer were also killed. So 4 casualties in this car accident that happened. And to your point, defending America, defending Mexico both, it was a good mission. They died in a good cause. I mean, we mourned the loss of life, but at the same time, but I think what you're getting to is this has had some follow-on effects since
last we met. It did, and last time we were talking, we were like, what's going to happen next? Well, a lot more than I expected to happen. And part of that was because of the response of the state. So let's catch people up here. After those deaths, let's start with how should Mexico have responded to it and what happened instead?
It actually is. Hypotheticals are rarely worth the time, but this one is an exception. This one is worth the time because we can draw the hypothetical of what a competent Mexican state, informed by the statecraft of prudence, would have done in a case like this. Now, we should start by acknowledging that if you are in Mexican governance, I think out of charity, it is alarming to learn that the Central Intelligence Agency is working with the state of Chihuahua and accompanying them on raids against narcos. But you know who else is doing that? The Mexican federal government is also doing that. We've since learned that the Central Intelligence Agency is extraordinarily active throughout Mexico. And one of the things that they're doing with the Mexican federal government is apparently, we know of one case in which they facilitated, we don't know all the details, so I'll use the word facilitated, but they facilitated a car bomb against a Mexican national who was involved in the narco trade. And this was actually done with the cooperation and knowledge of the Mexican security services themselves. So looks like everybody in Mexico is working with the CIA. States are doing it. Federal government's doing it. Not coincidentally, the ambassador to Mexico, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Ronald Johnson, a very, very good man, very competent man, very security-oriented individual. So, Americans can rest assured we've got the right guy there. He is a veteran of the CIA ground branch, which I think is safe to say is in the shadowy world of special operations is some of the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
And so it's not coincidental that this activity is happening concurrent with his presence helming the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. With that in mind, knowing that the U.S. ambassador regards these men properly as comrades in arms, knowing that CIA cooperation in Mexican governance extends throughout the superstructure, and knowing also that the Americans are paying very close attention to what's happening in Mexico right now, and actually from a positive standpoint, looking for signs of improvement. What the Mexican state should have done, what the president of Mexico should have done probably, is issue the pronouncements in soberanía. That's just part of Mexican civics. You should do it. But at the same time, express condolences and maybe a little bit of appreciation for what these men were doing in the defense of both Mexico and the United States. And then take all other issues out of the public eye, which is easy to do. They could have done it. They didn't do any of that. What they actually did, what President Claudia Sheinbaum actually did, and I will confess to being very surprised by it, I developed a much more positive appreciation of her management of these things.
Well, you had, I think, reason to, because there was at least a year of more cooperation than we had seen in probably decades, right? Or at least a decade. The
cooperation, and she'd also amassed a reputation as somebody who was very good at dealing with the Americans and with President Trump in particular.
Right.
And so you had the Canadians and the Europeans in particular saying, well, what does Claudia Sheinbaum have that we don't? And what she had, I think, was a deft touch. It's completely deserted her now. And you can see why, actually, when you look at the political forces that are now pressing in upon her. With the revelation of the CIA operations, knowing that she herself is complicit in CIA operations in Mexico, which still has yet to come to fruition as a thing, but that's out in the open. She managed to misstep almost every step of the way with respect to the CIA officers. She issued, I would say, a pro forma condolence, but it was along the lines that we regret all loss of life. Well, okay. But then her government, made a very abortive effort to actually attack the dead CIA officers, saying that they entered the country on a false pretext. Then they have, which they're still doing, they went after the Chihuahuan officials as well, who were cooperating with the CIA officers. So not only did they go after the Americans, they went after the people who worked with the Americans. So if you are an American who is maybe in charge of an embassy or in charge of Mexico policy, what you ended up seeing across the past 30 days plus is a pattern of the Morena regime in Mexico going hard, not only after the United States, but after anybody who works with us. And that has significantly changed the calculus vis-a-vis our relationship. And I think, and I assume this is where you're leading us, Ariana, I think it's safe to say that right now they are leading Mexico from crisis into the abyss. And this is the worst crisis. I think we should be clear, and the viewer should understand this too. This is the worst crisis in U.S. Mexico relations in a century. And that includes Kiki Camarena, that includes oil nationalization, that includes any other episode you can think of. Things are bad and they're getting worse. And I'm not sure Palacio Nacional really grasps just how bad it's going to get.
Which is, again, crazy to say, because 2 months ago we would have said, hey, cooperation's looking better than it had. There's still room to go, but there's a lot of potential here for some good relationship stuff. But just to give a little bit of added context as well, to the background, I think we had mentioned this in the last one too, how the Chihuahuan government at the time is run by, and I think still now is run by the
PAN. Yes, right. It is a putatively more right-wing party. But the governor's name is Maru Campos. She's anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, just all that to say that adds at least to the background and why she would I think, choose to attack I guess take a shot at the party. Probably wasn't a good time to do it, but that was her part of her out is blame your, I guess, internal enemy at least.
Yeah, it's worth noting that Morena, which is the Mexican ruling party, it's the regime party, hates. I mean, there are multiple parties in the Mexican political context, but they hate PAN more than anything else. They hate PAN. They don't hate PRI. They don't hate Verde. They don't hate the Los Verdes in the same way that they hate PAN. They hate PAN for two reasons. One is that PAN is actually notionally on the right. Now that's a variable quantity these days, but so they hate it for being derechista. But the other thing they hate PAN for is they actually have this stolen election myth from 2006 in which PAN stole the election from Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, who's the founding figure of Morena. And so for them, PAN is just the enemy inside, and they're incapable of prudentially regarding it at this point, which is why they're going hard after Maru Campos, after the Chihuahuan government, and as a consequence, after the Americans too.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was interesting the way it seemed to, I think, soften her rhetoric towards the Americans because she was trying to point some of it inside, but I mean, I still think it was a little bit transparent. But you used some pretty strong language when you said that this is the biggest crisis between Mexico and America in a century.
Yes.
Why is that, and what's happening now?
It's because you've never really been in a position in the past century in which the United States is engaged, and I don't think this is a primary aim of the United States. I just want to be really clear, but is engaged in actions that it knows will contribute to the delegitimization of the Mexican regime.
And I forgot to even mention what those actions were. So another thing that's happened since then is the indictments of 10 individuals. Is that correct? 2 of them being Mexican political figures. And this is what we've been talking about since we started the show. Hey, where are the indictments on the politicians, the people who would actually make a difference here?
This has been something. Yeah, this is I think at the heart of the crisis now. So we at the Texas Public Policy Foundation have been talking for years, and Hard Country listeners know this, which includes all of you watching this, that we have been saying for years that you must go after the narco-politician class, that without that, there is no strategic win. And we haven't done it. Trump 1 didn't do it. The Biden administration definitely didn't do it, and Trump 2 actually has held off on it. And so without betraying confidences, but when we've had conversations with individuals, who are actively involved in governance, we've gotten 2 messages, and they're not mutually exclusive. One is that it would be too damaging to go after the narco politicians, so we're going to focus on going after cartel men. We're going to take the tactical and operational wins, knowing that we don't have the strategic wins, but the strategic wins are just too high cost. And the other thing that we've heard is that just basically that the strategic wins are coming. So what has ended up happening is that exactly 10 days after the deaths of the CIA officers in Chihuahua, the deaths of also the Chihuahuan security services, given the cold reaction of the Mexican state to it, the negative reaction of the Mexican state to that, 10 days later, indictments of political officials finally came out. It's the thing we've been waiting for the whole time. And we should also note that back at the beginning of this year, there was a list that we were credibly informed was actually delivered to the Mexicans on who they're interested in, who the politicians were, who the governors were, who the senators were, and so on, that the United States was interested in. The delivery of that list, which was done in private, essentially, although we did hear about it from multiple sources, is what plausibly incepted the killing of El Mencho on February 22nd. Like El Mencho, who was the head of the Jaliscienses, was meant as essentially an offering to the Americans to not to throw us off the scent of the politicals, but just to say, hey, look, we can still deliver big wins. Just don't press us on the political side. Well, the Rubicon is crossed. We've indicted the governor of Sinaloa. We've indicted a senator from Sinaloa. We've indicted an alcalde. Like everybody there, kind of going down the line, is a political figure of some kind. Now the top 2 are Senator Encinas and Governor Ruben Rocha Moya, both of whom,
Sinaloa.
Both from Sinaloa. That's exactly right. And Sinaloa, of course, is the home of the Sinaloa cartel, which has been historically linked to Morena in general.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was going to be the next.
Oh, absolutely.
next
and the ties there go back, plausibly 20 years. So there's a lot of reporting and investigation on that. But it's worth noting that the Rocha, Senator Rocha, came to power in the 2021 state election in Sinaloa, which was infamous. I remember hearing about it kind of in whispered terms, and nobody would go on the record at the time. But essentially the Sinaloa cartel came out and executed a series of actions, including kidnapping and extorting, members of rival political parties, kind of election workers and things like that, in order to put the Morena candidate over the line and put him into the governorship. And of course, he's responded by protecting their operations. He takes bribes from them and so on. So it's,
and then has a close relationship, like I guess at least a public friendly relationship as well. AMLO did with like going to go visit the mother of
Andres. Yes, Andres Manuel, who's not indicted, by the way. So
right.
I think that's but I think that's on the menu at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the founder of Morena, you're right, has had a very friendly relationship with the Sinaloans. A journalist friend of mine said, told me years ago, he said, just watch. Says AMLO never says a bad word about the Sinaloans, and in fact, he hasn't. I mean, he praised them from time to time. In fact,
went to go visit
El Chapo's mother, like
mm-hmm.
paid respect, like during COVID. When one of the Chapitos was captured in 2019 by the army, he actually intervened to make sure the guy was released. If you wanted to build a circumstantial case that this guy really loves the Sinaloa cartels, it's pretty easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're informed about the longstanding, probable fiscal ties, things like Rocha's election, it becomes fairly clear that there's a synthesis between the party and the cartel, which doesn't just exist in Sinaloa. It exists throughout the country with a variety of actors. But this is what the Americans are finally striking at. We've finally thrown down the gauntlet and named the political class. And I don't want to get ahead of you, Ariana. You're the actual host of the show. But there's things that are going to happen now as a consequence of that.
Right. And I also do want to distinguish something that you were saying, how the Morena party seems to be tied to the Sinaloa cartels. But Claudia Sheinbaum herself, we've mentioned both on the show, and you reiterate here again, she herself does not seem to be have direct cartel ties herself in the same way that it looks like AMLO does,
right,
or other officials do. But now it seems like she's leaning on the scales towards them in a way she wasn't months prior. So where are we now? What is she doing, and what could happen because of it?
It's important to understand that Morena is a coalition, as all political parties are.
Right.
And so I will grossly oversimplify here because again, this could be an hours-long conversation. But you can sort of roughly separate Morena into two groups, and the larger of the groups is, I would say, the well, actually, I don't even know. I'd say they're larger, but arguably the most significant group that includes the founders, in my view, is a cohort of political figures who have engaged in, for a variety of reasons, this accommodation, synthesis, cooperation with a variety of cartels. I mean, Sinaloa is the one that we keep naming, but it's not just them. I mean, it changes according to where they are in the country. And so these are the narco-politicians, the ones that we have argued strategically we need to take out, bring to accountability, get out of governance, and so on. And they include the figures that are closest to Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who founded the party, who was president of Mexico from 2018 to 2024, Sheinbaum's predecessor. There's another group, though, that I do think includes the current president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. I would include Marcelo Ebrard in this, and this is kind of what I call the technocrats group. And the technocrats are not necessarily united, but for Sheinbaum herself, the party for her is, and this is probably true of the activist space as well within the party, which is huge. Again, this is a very popular party in Mexico. We shouldn't obscure that. But is ideologically dedicated to the transformation of Mexican society and Mexican civics into a left populist autocracy. It's almost, in a previous era we would call it almost Soviet. It's kind of a smiley face Soviet, but it is
we'll use the friendly American way of democratic socialism of some kind.
Oh, there we go. Yes, democratic socialism. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, it looks better on the camp, like
exactly.
The camp signs.
Yes.
So that's what she's for, and that's why she wants to. So I wouldn't interpret what she's doing now as in protecting these politicians, because she is. She's protecting Rocha, she's protecting Encinas, she's protecting all the rest from the Americans. She's not doing it because she's suddenly become pro-cartel. That's not the thing. What she's trying to do is hold the party together, because she knows that there's a risk that the whole thing will fly apart. And if it flies apart, then her ideological project, the one to which she's personally committed, is over, that there's going to be no vehicle for it. And that to her, and if I was a communist, I'd feel the same way. That to her is a generational opportunity that's lost, and that's what she's trying to navigate right now.
Right.
But I don't think we're going to let her do it.
So, this entire article and this entire episode is building up the background to now the next steps that she is going to take and what the Americans are probably going to do in response. So what's on the table here for America and for Mexico in the coming days and weeks?
This is what has to be understood very clearly. And for those of you out there who read this piece, if you take nothing else from it, I want you to take this: that the indictments of Rocha, of Encinas, and everybody else are just the beginning. that the United States has not come anywhere close to exercising its full range of options vis-a-vis Mexico. And the Mexicans, Palacio Nacional, they're on an escalator right now. They can step off the escalator anytime they want to. The price tag gets higher the higher up they ride it. But what they need to understand is that Rocha and Sunsa are not the hill to die on. Rocha and Sunsa and company, their indictments is a warning shot. It feels like an existential crisis to them because they've just never been held accountable before, but it's only the beginning. There are other people to indict. They can go further up the ladder. And you talk to people that, have some sense of who the persons of interest are. We're talking about, Adán Augusto, who's, Secretario de Gobernación, so essentially the number 2 guy in AMLO's government. He's now a senator. They include AMLO's son, who interestingly enough, Andy.
This was a funny thing that you told me earlier today. I didn't know. Yes,
this is not in the article, but I'll tell you. So he's been the head of the Morena party. He's like the party chief. So it'd be the equivalent of the DNC chairman, except that he actually does things in the United States. But he I think in the past 48 hours as we film, he announced that he's stepping down as party chair, and he's going to I believe run for a seat in El Congreso. He's going to become a diputado, and it's not because he's suddenly interested in politics. It's because under Mexican constitutional law, if you are a member of the legislature, you can't be deported.
Yeah,
you can't be deported. Like we can indict him, but the idea he has what's called the fuero, which means essentially immunity. And so he wants that fuero because he needs that immunity just in case, because otherwise it's really easy, from a legal standpoint, to get him, to grab him, to send him to the United States, which tells you a lot about his sense of exposure and maybe a bit of his conscience as to what he's been up to. But we can, thinking about that escalation ladder, if we're here right now, we can go the next level up and indict, the Ariana Guajardos and the Andy Beltrans and so on. Another level above that, to go to the apex of the pyramid, would be, and again, I have no information that this is could be true, but it's not impossible, given that he has been the subject of Department of Justice investigations in the United States in years prior. You could have an indictment. Now, this would be an atom bomb. You could have an indictment of Andrés Manuel. Off to the side, you also have to understand that USMCA reauthorization is happening right now. And the United States, it'd be nice to have it reauthorized. That's existential for the Mexican economy, which has been growing at essentially 0% for most of this decade, thanks to Morena. So they must have a reauthorization. They need the certainty. They need the flow of goods and commerce, actually, ironically, to the United States. But we don't have to do it. And if we decide not to reauthorize, if we decide to go to a year-to-year reauthorization or something else, all that uncertainty and all that economic hit is going to accrue 99% to the Mexicans, not to the U.S. And for them, again, that's existential. We also have effectively, with the executive order that the president put out on ensuring the security of financial systems and transfers, we're putting a stranglehold on remittances, which is another major prop of the Mexican economy. And then the final tool in the kit, which I don't think we're anywhere near, so I just want to be really explicit. I'm going to mention this, but I'm not predicting it.
Just say we have it. No one's reached for it or anything.
We have it. Well, no one's reached for it. I'm neither predicting it nor am I advocating for it. But if you think about indictment level 1, indictment level 2, nuclear indictments, economic pressure, financial pressure, all of this coming in, if none of that works, then you are looking at true intervención, true violation of soberanía, which is Caracas-style raids in Mexico. And I don't think that is something that should be dismissed as just completely unthinkable. It may be unlikable, but it is not unthinkable. Last thing I'll say on this is I saw just 15 minutes before we went on air here. So again, this is going to be a little bit old when this finally gets published. But as of date of filming, the Guatemalans have reached an accord with the U.S. Department of War to allow American military strikes on Guatemalan territory against cartels. And so the Ecuadorians have a similar arrangement. There's some other conversations with these ACCC countries throughout the hemisphere. But if you don't think the Guatemalan case in particular, now Mexico's southern border is shared with Guatemala, that has direct effects on Mexico. And you have to imagine that Sedena, Semar, the security apparatus, everybody is watching that very, very, very closely. Now, all this is very dire if you are in Mexican leadership. But again, they could step off the escalator at any time. And the way to do that, honestly, would be to hand over the men that we've indicted so they can have a fair trial with fair representation in the United States. The question is Do they have the statecraft and prudence to do that? Right now, the answer is no.
Well, I want to conclude today's show by now going back to this idea of soberanía and what that actually looks like for Mexico. And you conclude it really well in your article, so I would like to just read that. But first of all, do you have any last things? I think we covered it. It's now just we'll see what Mexico happens. Next time we meet, we'll be talking about probably what has happened or is about to happen with USMCA. We'll know a lot more by then.
Indeed. Well, I think the beautiful thing is that in giving you the last word, you're giving me the last word. So please,
I'll proceed.
Please go ahead.
The irony is that the strongest support for soberanía mexicana is not from the Palacio Nacional, nor from Morena, nor from the president in her mañaneras, but from the United States Department of Justice, Southern District of New York, which is doing what the regime in Mexico City will not, and taking on the narco politicians unworthy of a great nation.
Exactly.
So, again, phenomenal summary there. How was my pronunciation? Is my mom going to be proud or disappointed in me?
I assume that your mom is proud of you at all times, as she should be. But if not, then that's what husbands are for. So, I think
he'll say at least "nice try" or something along those lines.
No, he absolutely will. And again, June 8th print edition of the Spectator World. So look for it on your newsstands.
Right.
Thanks.
Again, everyone go read it, share this episode, and we will see you probably talking about USMCA very soon. See you next time.